The radio crackled with desperation as Phoenix units screamed for help, pinned down by enemy fire with nowhere to run. That's when a voice cut through the chaos. Unauthorized, forbidden, but deadly precise. Ghost 7. Targets down. In the next 60 seconds, everything would change. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning briefing at Forward Operating Base Ranger Point carried the familiar weight of controlled tension that preceded every major operation. Officers shuffled through intelligence packets while communication specialists ran final equipment checks in the background. The air hung thick with the scent of strong coffee and diesel exhaust, mixed with the ever-present dust that seemed to infiltrate every corner of this remote outpost in the Afghan mountains. Samantha Pierce sat in the back row, her chair positioned deliberately apart from the main cluster of personnel. At 28, she possessed the kind of focused intensity that came from years of precision work under pressure. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her eyes, sharp and observant, moved constantly, taking in details that others missed. In her hands, she held her assignment packet, though she already suspected what it contained before breaking the seal. "Listen up, people," Captain Derek Lawson's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. He stood at the front of the briefing room, his bearing radiating the confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to command. Today's operation targets a high-value insurgent network operating in the Khost Valley. Intelligence indicates they've been using the mountain passes to move weapons and personnel into our operational area. Samantha's eyes moved to the topographical map projected on the wall. She had studied this terrain extensively during her off-duty hours, memorizing every elevation change, every potential line of sight, every blind spot that could conceal enemy movement. The valley system was complex, with multiple approaches and numerous positions that could provide effective overwatch of the primary routes. Phoenix units will conduct sweep and clear operations through the main valley corridor, Captain Lawson continued, his pointer tracing routes on the illuminated map. "We have solid intelligence on enemy positions, and air support will be on standby. This should be a straightforward operation." Samantha noted several concerning gaps in the planned approach. The intelligence briefing showed enemy positions along the obvious routes, but her study of the terrain had revealed at least 3 alternative approaches that insurgents could use to establish ambush positions. The communication plan also showed potential dead zones in sectors 4 and 7. "Pierce," Captain Lawson's voice cut through her analysis, "you'll be positioned at Overwatch Position Hawk's Eye as backup observation. Your assignment is simple. Monitor the operation and provide supplementary intelligence if requested. Stay off primary communication channels unless specifically directed otherwise." A few muffled clutches rippled through the room. Sergeant Jake Brennan, seated 3 rows ahead, turned slightly and whispered something to his neighbor about Scope Queens playing real soldier. The comment wasn't intended for her ears, but the acoustics of the metal-walled briefing room carried sound with uncomfortable clarity. Samantha kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had earned her reputation as one of the finest marksmen in the battalion, with confirmed kills that exceeded those of many soldiers who received far more recognition. Her precision shooting scores were consistently perfect, and her ability to read terrain and weather conditions was legendary among those who had worked with her directly. Yet, somehow, she always found herself assigned to secondary positions, relegated to backup roles, while less qualified personnel took the primary assignments. The pattern had become so consistent that she had stopped questioning it openly, though the frustration burned quietly beneath her professional exterior. "Any questions?" Captain Lawson scanned the room with practiced efficiency, his tone suggesting that questions would be unwelcome interruptions to his carefully planned briefing. Samantha raised her hand slightly. "Sir, the communication plan shows potential dead zones in sectors 4 and 7. Should we establish alternate frequency protocols for those areas?" "The communication plan is adequate as written, Pierce," Captain Lawson interrupted, his voice carrying a dismissive edge. "Your job is to observe and report when asked, not to redesign operational parameters that have already been approved at higher levels." The dismissal stung more than it should have. Around the room, personnel exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable with the abrupt shutdown, others seeming to view it as standard procedure when dealing with someone who consistently pushed beyond their assigned boundaries. Staff Sergeant Lisa Crawford, seated near the communications equipment, caught Samantha's eye and gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Lisa had been one of the few people in the unit who consistently treated Samantha's tactical input with respect, often seeking her opinion on technical matters away from the formal briefing environment where hierarchy dictated interaction. As the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out to prepare for the operation, Samantha gathered her materials with deliberate precision. She had learned to move methodically in these situations, avoiding the rushed energy that might draw unwarranted attention to her presence. Her gear was already packed and organized, with the meticulous attention to detail that came from years of preparing for missions where every piece of equipment could mean the difference between success and failure. Outside the briefing room, the base hummed with pre-mission activity. Vehicles were being loaded with ammunition and supplies. Weapons underwent final inspections, and communication systems received last-minute testing. Samantha walked toward the armory with steady, purposeful steps, her boots finding sure footing on the packed earth that served as the base's main thoroughfare. Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh looked up as she approached the weapons checkout station. Walsh was a veteran of 3 deployments, with the weathered appearance and practical wisdom that came from years of combat experience. His respect for competence transcended rank or gender, making him one of the few senior personnel who treated Samantha as the professional she had proven herself to be. "Heading up to Hawk's Eye, Pierce?" Walsh's voice carried the easy familiarity of someone who had worked with her on previous operations. "That's right, Sergeant. I need to check out my rifle and verify the scope calibration." Walsh's expression grew slightly more serious as he retrieved her weapons system from the secure storage area. "Word of advice about that position. The mountain weather can shift without warning up there. Winds change direction fast, and visibility can drop to nothing when the clouds roll in. You'll want to have backup plans for multiple scenarios." Samantha nodded, appreciating the practical guidance. "Any recommendations for alternate positions if the primary overwatch becomes compromised?" "There's a secondary ridge about 300 meters northeast of your assigned position. It's not as good for long-range observation, but it offers better protection and usually has cleaner radio reception when atmospheric conditions interfere with communications." As Walsh helped her verify the rifle's condition and scope alignment, Samantha felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and frustration that accompanied these assignments. She was capable of much more than passive observation. Her training encompassed advanced marksmanship, tactical coordination, and battlefield assessment. But the military hierarchy operated according to its own logic, and challenging it openly had never improved her situation. The rifle checked out perfectly, its actions smooth and the scope precisely calibrated to her shooting specifications. She signed off on the equipment log and gathered her gear, knowing that whatever happened at Hawk's Eye, she would be prepared to adapt to changing circumstances. The helicopter insertion was scheduled for 0700 hours, which gave her 30 minutes to complete her final preparations. As she walked toward the landing zone, Samantha reflected on the familiar pattern of being assigned to observe while others conducted the primary mission. Today felt different somehow, though she couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the complexity of the terrain, or the gaps she had noticed in the operational planning, or simply the accumulated weight of being consistently underutilized. Whatever the reason, she found herself checking her equipment with extra care, ensuring that she would be ready for any contingency that might arise. The mission was bigger than any individual assignment, and regardless of the limitations placed on her role, she would not be the weak link in the operational chain. As the helicopter rotors began their familiar whine in the distance, Samantha shouldered her pack and walked toward whatever awaited her on the mountain called Hawk's Eye. The UH-60 Blackhawk lifted off from Forward Operating Base Ranger Point with the mechanical precision that characterized military operations, but Samantha could feel the underlying tension that accompanied every insertion into hostile territory. She sat in the web seating alongside 8 other soldiers, her rifle secured between her knees, and her pack containing enough supplies for a 72-hour operation. The helicopter's crew chief, a staff sergeant with the call sign Roadrunner, moved through the cabin checking equipment and ensuring everyone was properly secured for the flight. His movements were economical and professional, reflecting years of experience ferrying soldiers into dangerous situations. When he reached Samantha, he paused slightly. "First time to Hawkeye, ma'am?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "No, I've been up there twice before," Samantha replied, adjusting her headset to improve communication. "But never during an active operation of this scale." "Roger that. Weather forecast shows potential for rapid changes today. If you need extraction before scheduled pickup, use the emergency frequency. We'll be monitoring." The crew chief's practical concern was refreshing after the dismissive treatment she had received during the briefing. Military aviation personnel tended to focus on mission requirements rather than rank or politics, creating an environment where competence was the primary currency of respect. Through the helicopter's windows, Samantha watched the landscape transition from the relatively flat terrain around the base to the increasingly rugged mountains that characterized this region of Afghanistan. The Khost Valley spread below them like a geographic puzzle, with multiple ridgelines, deep ravines, and scattered vegetation that could conceal enemy movement or provide defensive positions. Sergeant Jake Brennan sat across from her, checking his equipment with the nervous energy of someone preparing for ground combat. Despite his earlier dismissive comments, Brennan was a competent soldier with solid tactical instincts. His skepticism toward Samantha seemed to stem more from institutional bias than personal animosity, though the result was the same, another voice questioning her capabilities. "Pierce," Brennan called over the rotor noise, "you ever actually engage targets from that Overwatch position, or is it just tourism duty up there?" The question was clearly intended to provoke, but Samantha responded with professional calm. "The position provides excellent observation of the entire valley system. If engagement becomes necessary, the sight lines are optimal for precision fire." "Yeah, but have you actually pulled the trigger when it mattered?" Staff Sergeant Crawford, seated near the helicopter's ramp, intervened before the conversation could escalate. "Brennan, focus on your own assignment. Pierce's record speaks for itself." Samantha appreciated Crawford's support, but she also knew that questions about her combat experience would continue until she had an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities under fire. The military culture placed enormous value on proven performance in combat situations, and no amount of training or qualification could substitute for documented success and actual engagements. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, a small clearing that had been carved out of the mountainous terrain specifically to support Overwatch operations. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom system. 2 minutes to insertion. Weather is clear, but winds are variable. Watch your footing on the LZ." Samantha performed a final equipment check, ensuring that her rifle was secure, her radio was functioning, and her navigation equipment was properly calibrated. The insertion would be fast and efficient, leaving her with minimal time to adjust before the helicopter departed for other operational requirements. As the aircraft settled onto the rocky landing zone, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the beginning of every operation. Whatever limitations had been placed on her role, she was now moving into a position where her skills and judgment would be tested against real-world conditions. The helicopter crew moved with practiced efficiency to offload her equipment and verify the pickup schedule. Extraction is scheduled for 1800 hours unless you call for emergency pickup. Weather permitting, we'll be here on time. Understood. Thanks for the ride, Roadrunner. As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared over the ridgeline, Samantha found herself alone on a remote mountain peak with a commanding view of the valley below. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming after the constant noise of the aircraft, broken only by the whisper of wind through the sparse vegetation and the distant sound of birds. Hawk's Eye was aptly named. The Overwatch position sat on a rocky outcropping that provided nearly 360-degree visibility of the surrounding terrain. To the south, she could see the main valley where Phoenix units would conduct their sweep operations. To the east and west, alternate approaches wound through secondary ridgelines that could serve as infiltration routes for enemy forces. She established her position with methodical precision, setting up her rifle on a stable shooting rest and arranging her equipment for optimal accessibility.
The radio equipment included both her assigned communication system and a backup radio that could monitor multiple frequencies simultaneously. Her spotting scope provided detailed observation capabilities beyond the range of her rifle scope.
The official assignment limited her to observation and backup communication, but Samantha's training encompassed much more comprehensive capabilities. She was qualified as a forward observer, capable of coordinating artillery and air support. Her marksmanship credentials included precision shooting at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Most importantly, her tactical awareness and ability to read battlefield conditions had been consistently rated as exceptional by instructors and peers alike. As she settled into her position and began systematic observation of the operational area, Samantha reflected on the pattern of assignments that had brought her to this point. She had consistently demonstrated superior technical skills and tactical judgment, yet she remained relegated to secondary roles while others received primary mission assignments. The frustration was compounded by her knowledge that her capabilities could contribute significantly to mission success if properly utilized. Her understanding of ballistics, terrain analysis, and tactical coordination exceeded that of many soldiers who held more prominent positions in the operational hierarchy. Her radio crackled to life with the first communication check of the day. Hawkeye, this is Phoenix Base. Communication check. Phoenix Base. Hawkeye. Signal clear and strong. Roger, Hawkeye. Maintain listening watch and report any observed activity in your sector. The transmission ended, leaving Samantha alone with her thoughts and the vast landscape spreading before her. She adjusted her spotting scope and began the systematic observation that would characterize the next several hours. Whatever restrictions had been placed on her role, she would execute her duties with the same precision and dedication she brought to every assignment. Below her position, the valley held its secrets close, but Samantha had learned to read the subtle signs that revealed enemy presence and movement patterns. Today would test not only her technical skills, but also her ability to adapt when the carefully planned operation encountered the chaos of real combat. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Khost Valley as Samantha settled into her observation routine at Hawkeye. From her elevated position, the entire operational area spread before her like a three-dimensional tactical map. She could see the primary routes that Phoenix units would use for their sweep operations, as well as the numerous secondary approaches that hadn't been adequately addressed in the mission briefing. Through her spotting scope, she began cataloging details that the intelligence reports had missed. Fresh vehicle tracks wound along a ridgeline that was supposed to be uninhabited. Disturbed vegetation marked recent human passage through areas that satellite imagery had shown as empty. Most concerning, she identified at least 4 positions that would provide excellent ambush opportunities against forces moving through the main valley corridor. Her radio crackled with routine traffic as Phoenix units began their insertion and movement toward the target area. Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 1. We're beginning movement through Checkpoint Alpha. All units report ready. Samantha monitored the communications while continuing her systematic observation. The Phoenix units were following their planned routes with military precision, but they were also moving through terrain that showed clear signs of recent enemy activity. She made careful notations on her tactical map, using a personal system of symbols that allowed her to track patterns and potential threats. Hawkeye, this is Phoenix Base. Her radio suddenly came alive with a direct communication. Report any observed activity in Sector 3 through 7. Samantha keyed her microphone carefully. Phoenix Base, Hawkeye. I'm observing signs of recent activity in Sector 5, including vehicle tracks and disturbed vegetation. Recommend increased caution in that area. Hawkeye, roger. Continue observation and report any active contacts. The response was professional, but brief, and Samantha could sense the underlying message. Provide information when asked, but don't exceed the scope of your assignment. She returned to her observation, though the signs of enemy presence were becoming increasingly obvious to her trained eye. Around midday, she began noticing movement patterns that concerned her.
Through breaks in the sparse vegetation, she could see what appeared to be coordinated positioning of personnel in areas that would provide overlapping fields of fire against the Phoenix routes. The movement was subtle and disciplined, suggesting trained fighters rather than opportunistic insurgents. She switched her radio to an alternate frequency and picked up fragmentary communications that weren't part of the official operational network. The transmissions were brief and coded, but their timing and frequency suggested a level of coordination that exceeded the intelligence estimates about enemy capabilities in the area. Her spotting scope revealed additional details that painted an increasingly troubling picture. The enemy positions were being established with clear sight lines to key choke points along the Phoenix routes. More concerning, the positioning suggested knowledge of American tactical procedures and likely movement patterns. This wasn't a random encounter, it was a carefully planned ambush. Phoenix Base, this is Hawkeye. I'm observing what appears to be coordinated enemy positioning in multiple sectors. Recommend Phoenix units hold position while we assess the situation. Hawkeye, maintain observation and report only confirmed enemy contact. The response carried an edge of irritation that made clear her continued warnings were unwelcome. She stared through her scope at the tactical situation developing below, watching American soldiers move toward what she could clearly see was a carefully prepared killing zone. Her training had taught her to follow orders and trust the chain of command, but her tactical awareness was screaming that the Phoenix units were about to walk into a disaster. The enemy positions were perfectly placed to catch the American forces in a crossfire with limited escape routes and minimal cover. She checked her equipment one more time, ensuring that her rifle was ready and her radio systems were functioning optimally. The rules of engagement were clear. She was authorized to defend herself and engage targets that posed immediate threats to friendly forces. But the definition of immediate threat was about to be tested in ways that military lawyers had never anticipated.
Through her scope, she could see the lead Phoenix elements approaching the ambush zone. The enemy fighters were disciplined and patient, waiting for the optimal moment to spring their trap. In approximately 15 minutes, the first American soldiers would enter the killing zone, and the carefully planned operation would turn into a desperate fight for survival. Samantha made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She began calculating ranges and wind conditions for multiple target engagements, preparing to act when the situation demanded action, regardless of what her official orders specified. The lives of fellow soldiers were about to hang in the balance, and she would be ready to tip that balance in their favor. Her radio crackled one more time with routine traffic, but Samantha was no longer listening to routine communications. She was focused entirely on the developing tactical situation, and the moment when her voice would cut through the chaos with deadly precision.
The ambush erupted with the sudden violence that characterized well-planned insurgent operations. Samantha watched through her scope as muzzle flashes bloomed from 6 different positions simultaneously, catching the lead Phoenix elements in a devastating crossfire. The sharp crack of automatic weapons fire echoed across the valley, punctuated by the deeper boom of rocket-propelled grenades and the distinctive whistle of bullets ricocheting off rocky surfaces. "Contact! Contact! Phoenix 1 taking heavy fire from multiple positions." The desperate transmission cut through the radio channels like a knife, replacing the calm professionalism of routine communications with the raw urgency of soldiers fighting for their lives. Through her spotting scope, Samantha could see the tactical situation unfolding with horrifying clarity. Phoenix units had walked directly into the killing zone she had identified, and the enemy positions were executing their ambush with lethal precision. American soldiers dove for whatever cover they could find, but the rocky terrain offered limited protection against the overlapping fields of fire. "Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 1. We're pinned down and taking casualties. Request immediate support. Grid coordinates follow." The transmission was professional, despite the obvious stress, but Samantha could see that the coordinates being transmitted were inaccurate due to the confusion and limited visibility from ground level. Her radio erupted with overlapping communications as Phoenix units tried to coordinate their response while under intense fire. "Phoenix 2, can you flank left?" "Negative. We've got RPG positions covering that approach." "Phoenix 3, what's your status?" "2 wounded. Need immediate medical evacuation."
The enemy fighters had clearly studied American tactical procedures and were systematically neutralizing the standard responses to ambush situations. Every time Phoenix units attempted to maneuver, they encountered precisely positioned enemy positions that forced them back into the killing zone. The insurgents had turned the terrain into a trap with no obvious escape route. Samantha keyed her radio urgently. "Phoenix base, this is Hawk's Eye. Phoenix units are in a prepared ambush site. Enemy positions are at grid coordinates." She began transmitting the precise locations she could observe from her elevated position, but her transmission was interrupted. "Hawk's Eye, maintain listening watch. Do not clutter communication channels during active engagement." The dismissal was bureaucratic madness in the face of unfolding disaster. Samantha stared through her scope at American soldiers pinned down by enemy fire, watching them die while she possessed information that could save their lives. Her elevated position gave her a clear view of all enemy positions, their movement patterns, and the tactical options available to Phoenix units. Her backup radio crackled with increasingly desperate communications. "Phoenix 1, this is Phoenix 4. We can't reach your position. Enemy has all approaches covered. Any station, any station. Phoenix 1 has multiple wounded. We need extraction or we're not going to make it." Through her rifle scope, Samantha began acquiring targets. The enemy positions were well within her effective range, and the elevated angle gave her clear shots at fighters who thought they were concealed from ground-level observation. Her training had prepared her for exactly this type of precision engagement, but her orders restricted her to observation only. She watched an enemy fighter with an RPG launcher preparing to engage Phoenix positions from a concealed location that the ground units couldn't see. The shot was clear, approximately 400 meters with a slight crosswind. She could eliminate the threat with a single round, but doing so would exceed her authority and expose her position to enemy response. "Phoenix base, Phoenix 2, we're running low on ammunition and still pinned down. Where's our air support?" "Phoenix 2, air support is en route, but weather is interfering with target identification. They need ground guidance for effective engagement." That transmission crystallized Samantha's decision. The air support was available, but couldn't see the targets from altitude. Phoenix units were pinned down and couldn't provide effective guidance. She was the only person with clear observation of the entire battlefield and the technical capability to coordinate precise airstrikes. Her radio crackled with another urgent transmission. "Any station with eyes on the target area, this is Blackbird flight. We're carrying precision ordnance, but we can't see anything through the haze. We need someone to talk us onto the targets." Samantha looked through her scope at the enemy positions that were systematically destroying Phoenix units. She could see muzzle flashes, movement patterns, and the specific locations where enemy fighters were coordinating their attack. The information she possessed could turn the tactical situation completely around, but using it would require her to exceed her orders in the most dramatic way possible. The sound of automatic weapons fire intensified as enemy forces pressed their attack. Through her scope, she could see Phoenix soldiers attempting to provide medical aid to wounded comrades under continuous fire. The enemy fighters were disciplined and patient, content to maintain their ambush while American forces bled out in the killing zone. Her training took over as she began calculating ranges, wind conditions, and target priorities. The enemy RPG position remained her highest priority target, followed by the machine gun nest that was preventing Phoenix units from maneuvering to safety. Beyond that, she could identify at least 4 additional positions that were contributing to the devastating crossfire.
Samantha made her choice. She switched her radio to the emergency frequency and keyed the microphone with steady hands, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. What happened next would either save the lives of Phoenix units or end her military career, but the decision was no longer difficult. Blackbird flight. Blackbird flight. This is Ghost 7. I have eyes on all enemy positions and can provide immediate guidance for precision strikes. The die was cast. Her voice had broken through the chaos, and now everything would change.
Ghost 7, this is Blackbird lead. We need immediate authentication before we can accept fire direction. The pilot's voice carried the professional caution of someone trained never to engage without proper authorization, but Samantha could also hear the underlying urgency that came from knowing friendly forces were dying below. Samantha's throat tightened. She had no official authentication codes for coordinating airstrikes, no authority to direct precision ordnance, and no backup if this decision went wrong. But through her scope, she could see another Phoenix soldier fall as enemy fire intensified, and she knew that following proper procedures would mean watching more Americans die. Blackbird lead, Ghost 7. I don't have authentication codes, but I have clear observation of 6 enemy positions that are systematically destroying Phoenix units. Your brothers are bleeding out down there, and I can put your ordnance exactly where it needs to go. The radio silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Samantha used the time to refine her target identification, noting wind patterns and calculating the precise coordinates that would allow the aircraft to engage without risking friendly fire. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, marking positions on her map while maintaining visual contact with the most critical threats. Ghost 7, this is Blackbird lead. We're going to trust you. Walk us through what you're seeing. Relief flooded through my chest, immediately followed by the crushing weight of responsibility. She was now coordinating precision airstrikes without authorization, directing aircraft carrying high-explosive ordnance in close proximity to American ground forces. Every calculation had to be perfect, every instruction precise, or she would be responsible for devastating friendly fire casualties. Blackbird lead, I have 6 primary targets. Priority target is an RPG position at grid 347892. Secondary targets are machine gun nests providing overlapping fire on Phoenix positions. I'll talk you on to the priority target first. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighter with the RPG launcher preparing for another shot at Phoenix positions. The target was approximately 400 meters from the nearest friendly forces, well within the safety margin for precision ordnance if the strike was accurate. Roger, Ghost 7, we're beginning our approach from the northeast. Talk us in. Samantha began providing detailed guidance, describing the terrain features and reference points that would allow the pilot to identify the target visually. Her training in forward observation took over as she calculated approach angles and attack headings that would maximize accuracy while minimizing risk to friendly fire. Blackbird lead, your target is on the rocky outcropping, 70 meters northeast of the dead tree. You'll see muzzle flashes from that position. Ghost 7, I have visual on the muzzle flashes. Confirm this is your target. Confirmed, you are cleared hot on that target. The airstrike hit with devastating precision. Samantha watched through her scope as the enemy position erupted in smoke and debris, the RPG threat eliminated in a single perfectly placed explosion. The effect on the tactical situation was immediate. Phoenix units could finally attempt to maneuver without the constant threat of rocket fire. Ghost 7, direct hit on target. What's next? Samantha was already acquiring the second target, a machine gun nest that was preventing Phoenix units from reaching cover. Blackbird lead, secondary target is a machine gun nest at grid 347886. It's in the cluster of rocks, approximately 50 meters south of your last strike. As she continued directing airstrikes with surgical precision, the enemy ambush began to collapse. Each eliminated position reduced the enemy's ability to maintain their coordinated attack, and Phoenix units started gaining tactical advantage. Her elevated position allowed her to see the entire battlefield and coordinate strikes that maximized disruption of enemy operations. Phoenix base, this is Phoenix 1. Enemy fire is decreasing. We are beginning to move wounded to extraction point. The relief in that transmission was audible, but Samantha knew her unauthorized actions had been monitored by everyone on the communication network. Phoenix base would have recorded every word of her coordination with Blackbird flight, creating an undeniable record of her violation of orders and chain of command. Her radio crackled with another urgent transmission. Ghost 7, this is Phoenix 2. We can see you're directing those strikes. Whatever call sign you're using, you just saved our lives. Samantha continued coordinating with Blackbird flight as they systematically eliminated the remaining enemy positions. Her target identification was flawless, her calculation precise, and her communication clear and professional. The airstrikes were textbook examples of close air support, executed with a level of precision that demonstrated exactly why forward observers underwent extensive training. Blackbird lead, final target is at grid 347901. Machine gun position in the Rocky Depression, danger close to friendly positions. I need your most precise ordnance on this one. Ghost 7, understand danger close. We'll use our smallest warhead and approach from an angle that minimizes blast effect on friendly positions. The final strike eliminated the last major enemy position, and the valley fell relatively quiet except for the distant sound of helicopters approaching for medical evacuation. The ambush had been turned into a rout, with surviving enemy fighters retreating deeper into the mountains to avoid further airstrikes. Phoenix Base, Phoenix 1, all wounded are secure and ready for evacuation. Thanks to whoever was calling in those strikes, they were perfect.
Samantha felt a complex mixture of pride and apprehension. Her unauthorized coordination had undoubtedly saved lives and turned a potential disaster into a tactical success. But she had also violated direct orders, exceeded her authority, and taken control of combat operations without authorization. The military justice system would not ignore such actions, regardless of their positive outcome. As the immediate crisis passed and Phoenix units began their extraction procedures, Samantha prepared for the inevitable consequences of her decision. Her radio logs would show exactly what she had done, creating an undeniable record of insubordination that could result in court-martial and the end of her military career. But as she watched the medical evacuation helicopters carrying wounded Phoenix soldiers to safety, she knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes leadership meant accepting responsibility for decisions that exceeded your authority, and she was prepared to face whatever consequences followed. The extraction helicopter's approach to Hawk's Eye came sooner than scheduled, its rotors cutting through the mountain air with mechanical urgency. Samantha had expected to remain at her observation post until the standard pickup time, but the events in the valley had clearly accelerated the operational timeline. She gathered her equipment with methodical precision, ensuring that nothing was left behind that could compromise future operations. As the UH-60 settled onto the rocky landing zone, she could see that it was the same aircraft and crew that had inserted her that morning. Staff Sergeant Roadrunner moved efficiently to help secure her gear, but his demeanor was different, more focused, almost reverential. "Ma'am, I heard the radio traffic from your position today," he said as they loaded her equipment. "That was some outstanding work up there. Phoenix units are saying you saved their entire operation." Samantha secured her rifle and pack, knowing that praise from the air crew was gratifying, but also potentially problematic. Word of her unauthorized actions was already spreading through the informal communication networks that connected all military personnel. "I did what the situation required, Sergeant." "Roger that, ma'am. Sometimes that's what leadership looks like." The flight back to forward operating base Ranger Point was notably quiet. Phoenix personnel occupied most of the helicopter seating, including 3 wounded soldiers who were receiving medical attention from the aircraft's crew. The wounded were stable, but served as stark reminders of how close the operation had come to becoming a complete disaster. Sergeant Jake Brennan sat across from her, his earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching respect. During the flight, he leaned forward to speak over the rotor noise. "Pierce, I owe you an apology. What you did up there was exactly what we needed someone to do." "Thank you, Sergeant. I'm glad the outcome was positive." "Positive? You turned a complete clusterfuck into a textbook example of how air support should work. Those strikes were perfect, danger-close precision that saved lives without endangering friendlies." The praise was genuine, but Samantha could also hear the underlying concern in Brennan's voice. Everyone on the helicopter understood that unauthorized coordination of airstrikes was a serious violation of military regulations, regardless of the positive outcome. Her actions had saved lives, but they had also created a complex disciplinary situation. As the helicopter approached the landing zone at Ranger Point, Samantha could see that an unusual amount of activity was centered around the operations center. More personnel than normal were present, including several officers she didn't recognize. The scene suggested that her actions had attracted attention at levels well above the normal operational hierarchy. The landing and disembarkation proceeded with military efficiency, but Samantha noticed that Staff Sergeant Crawford was waiting near the landing zone with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension. As soon as the helicopter's rotors began spinning down, Crawford approached with obvious urgency.
Pierce, you need to know that your radio communications were monitored at multiple levels. Captain Lawson's demanding a full investigation, but there are also people saying you prevented a complete disaster. Samantha shouldered her pack and began walking toward the equipment turn-in area. I understand the situation, Sergeant. My actions were unauthorized, and I'll accept responsibility for them. That's not the point. Phoenix One filed a report stating that your coordination saved the lives of at least 6 soldiers. Blackbird Flight submitted documentation describing your air support direction as the most professional they've ever experienced. You're not just facing disciplinary action, you're also being recommended for commendation. The contradiction was typical of military bureaucracy, but it also reflected the complex nature of her situation. She had violated direct orders and exceeded her authority, but she had also demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical leadership and technical competence that the military claimed to value.
Sergeant Pierce, I've been reviewing the communication logs and after-action reports from today's operation. Your radio work was exceptional, but it also represents a significant violation of operational procedures. Samantha invited the colonel into her quarters, knowing that this conversation would be crucial to determining her future. Yes, ma'am. I understand the seriousness of my actions. The situation is complicated, Colonel Sterling continued, spreading documents on Samantha's small table. Phoenix units are adamant that your intervention saved lives and prevented a tactical disaster. Blackbird Flight has submitted reports describing your coordination as textbook perfect. But Captain Lawson is demanding disciplinary action for insubordination and unauthorized assumption of command authority. Samantha studied the documents, noting detailed analyses of her radio communications and tactical decisions. Ma'am, I made a conscious decision to exceed my authority because I believed the alternative was watching fellow soldiers die. I accept full responsibility for that choice. That's exactly what I expected you to say, Colonel Sterling replied. The question now is whether the military justice system can distinguish between destructive insubordination and necessary battlefield initiative. As Colonel Sterling prepared to leave, she turned back with a final comment. Pierce, tomorrow's inquiry will determine your immediate future, but I want you to know that your actions today demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical leadership we need in our personnel. The challenge is convincing others that rules sometimes need to be adapted to save lives. The night before the inquiry would be the longest of Samantha's military career, but she faced it with the knowledge that she had acted according to her conscience and training when lives were at stake. The preliminary inquiry convened at 0800 hours in the base conference room, a sterile space dominated by a long table and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across the assembled personnel. Samantha sat at the respondent's position, her dress uniform crisp and her bearings straight, while the investigating officers arranged their documents with methodical precision. Captain Derek Lawson occupied the primary investigating officer's chair, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed vindication was imminent. Beside him sat Major Patricia Reynolds, the base legal officer, whose presence indicated that the proceedings could result in formal charges requiring court-martial proceedings. Colonel Rebecca Sterling served as the presiding officer, her role requiring her to balance the competing demands of military discipline and operational effectiveness. Her opening statement set the tone for what would prove to be a complex examination of the boundary between initiative and insubordination. This inquiry will examine the actions of Sergeant Samantha Pierce during Operation Valley Sweep, specifically regarding unauthorized tactical coordination and exceeding assigned operational parameters, Colonel Sterling began. Sergeant Pierce, you understand that these proceedings could result in formal disciplinary action up to and including court-martial? Yes, ma'am. I understand the potential consequences, and I do not dispute the basic facts regarding my actions. Captain Lawson leaned forward, his voice carrying the prosecutorial edge of someone preparing to make a definitive case. Sergeant Pierce, you were specifically briefed that your role was limited to observation and backup communications. You had no authority whatsoever to coordinate airstrikes or assume tactical control of combat operations. That's correct, sir. My assigned role was observation only.
Yet you deliberately chose to exceed that authority and take control of a tactical situation that was being handled through proper command channels. Your actions represent a fundamental violation of military discipline and chain of command. Samantha had prepared for this line of questioning, but she also knew that her response would define not only her immediate future, but also the precedent for how similar situations might be handled in the future. Sir, the proper command channels had failed to prevent Phoenix units from walking into a prepared ambush. When Blackbird Flight requested ground guidance for airstrikes, I was the only person with clear observation of all enemy positions and the technical capability to provide that guidance. Major Reynolds consulted her legal documents before responding. Sergeant Pierce, military operations require strict adherence to chain of command precisely to prevent the chaos that results from unauthorized individual action. Your assumption of tactical control, regardless of its outcome, created a dangerous precedent that could undermine command authority in future operations. Ma'am, with respect, Phoenix units were pinned down and taking casualties while proper command channels were unable to provide the air support coordination they needed. My choice was between following procedures and watching fellow soldiers die or exceeding my authority to provide assistance that could save lives. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement settled over the assembled officers. Colonel Sterling made notes on her legal pad while studying Samantha with an expression that revealed nothing about her assessment of the situation. Captain Lawson stood up, his voice taking on the formal tone of military prosecution. Colonel Sterling, Sergeant Pierce has admitted to deliberately violating direct orders and assuming unauthorized control of combat operations. Her actions, regardless of their tactical outcome, represent exactly the kind of individual initiative that undermines military discipline and operational coordination. The outcome is relevant, a new voice interrupted from the back of the room. Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez entered with a folder of documents and the purposeful stride of someone carrying important information. Colonel Sterling, I have technical analysis of the communication failures that occurred during Operation Valley Sweep, as well as detailed documentation of Sergeant Pierce's tactical coordination. Colonel Sterling frowned at the interruption. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, this is a disciplinary inquiry, not a technical review. Ma'am, with respect, the technical failures are directly relevant to Sergeant Pierce's actions. The communication breakdowns left battlefield commanders without the information they needed to coordinate effective air support. Her intervention filled a critical gap that our standard procedures couldn't address. Rodriguez spread his documents on the table, revealing detailed analyses of radio communications, target identification accuracy, and the timeline of events during the ambush. Sergeant Pierce's coordination with Blackbird Flight was textbook perfect. Every target she identified was eliminated with precision strikes that avoided friendly fire casualties. Her technical competence under pressure exceeded that of many personnel with official forward observer qualifications. Captain Lawson objected strenuously. Technical competence doesn't excuse insubordination. Military discipline requires following orders even when individual judgment suggests alternative actions. Even when following orders results in unnecessary casualties? Samantha asked quietly. The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Colonel Sterling leaned back in her chair, studying the competing documents and testimonies that painted radically different pictures of the same events. Major Reynolds shuffled through her legal precedents, clearly struggling with the intersection of military law and battlefield pragmatism.
Sergeant Pierce, Colonel Sterling said finally, you're asking this inquiry to consider whether tactical success justifies violating direct orders. That's a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire foundation of military authority. Ma'am, I'm asking this inquiry to consider whether rigid adherence to failed procedures is more important than preserving the lives of fellow soldiers who were depending on someone to provide the assistance they desperately needed. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward with additional documentation. Colonel Sterling, I've also compiled statements from Phoenix personnel and Blackbird flight crew. Every person involved in the tactical situation has submitted reports stating that Sergeant Pierce's coordination was essential to mission success and casualty prevention. The testimonials made for compelling reading. Phoenix 1 described her guidance as the difference between catastrophic failure and tactical success.
Blackbird Lead characterized her coordination as the most professional forward observation I've experienced in 15 years of combat operations. Even personnel who had not been directly involved in the engagement acknowledged that her actions had prevented what could have been a devastating loss of American lives. Captain Lawson remained unmoved by the testimonials. Positive outcomes don't excuse violations of military authority. If we allow individuals to exceed their orders whenever they believe circumstances justify it, we destroy the command structure that makes military operations possible. And if we prevent qualified personnel from acting when lives are at stake, we create a bureaucracy that values procedure over mission success, Samantha replied. Colonel Sterling called for a 30-minute recess to review the evidence and testimonies. As the room emptied, Samantha remained seated, processing the weight of the competing arguments and the knowledge that her military future hung in the balance of institutional priorities she couldn't control. The next 30 minutes would determine whether the military could distinguish between destructive insubordination and necessary battlefield leadership, and whether her voice would continue to guide operations or be silenced by the rigid requirements of military discipline.
When the inquiry reconvened, Colonel Sterling's expression remained unreadable, as she took her seat and arranged her notes with deliberate precision. The 30-minute recess had felt like hours to Samantha, who had used the time to prepare herself for whatever decision awaited. The competing testimonies and evidence had created a complex picture that defied simple resolution. "This inquiry has presented me with a difficult decision," Colonel Sterling began, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "Sergeant Pierce, you have admitted to exceeding your assigned authority and conducting unauthorized tactical coordination during Operation Valley Sweep. These actions constitute clear violations of military regulations and chain-of-command protocols." Samantha felt her chest tighten as the formal language suggested that her military career was approaching its end. Captain Lawson leaned forward slightly, his expression suggesting satisfaction with the direction of the colonel's comments. "However," Colonel Sterling continued, "the evidence also demonstrates that your actions were taken in response to the failure of authorized procedures and the imminent threat to friendly forces. Your technical competence and tactical judgment prevented casualties and contributed directly to mission success." The room remained completely silent as everyone waited for the crucial determination that would define the precedent for future similar situations. Major Reynolds took notes continuously, documenting what was clearly becoming a landmark case in military justice regarding the balance between discipline and initiative. "Military service requires adherence to orders and respect for chain of command, but it also requires intelligent leadership when circumstances exceed the scope of standard operating procedures. The question before this inquiry is whether your actions represent destructive insubordination or necessary battlefield adaptation." Samantha held her breath, knowing that the next words would determine not only her future, but also the military's approach to similar situations that would inevitably arise in complex operational environments. After reviewing all evidence, including the technical analysis provided by Master Sergeant Rodriguez and the testimonials from Phoenix personnel and Blackbird Flight, I find that your actions, while technically unauthorized, were necessary and appropriate given the tactical situation you observed. Relief flooded through Samantha's system, but Colonel Sterling was far from finished with her deliberation. However, the irregular nature of your assumption of tactical control cannot be ignored completely. Military discipline requires consequences for exceeding assigned authority, even when the results are positive. Therefore, you will receive a formal letter of reprimand for violating operational procedures. Captain Lawson stood up abruptly. "Colonel Sterling, with respect, a letter of reprimand seems inadequate for such a clear violation of chain of command. Sergeant Pierce's actions, regardless of their outcome, set a dangerous precedent for individual initiative that bypasses proper authority." Colonel Sterling turned to face Captain Lawson directly. "Captain, military leadership often involves making decisions that exist in the gray areas between strict regulation and operational necessity. Sergeant Pierce demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical competence and tactical judgment that we need in our personnel, even if her methods were irregular." She turned back to Samantha with a slight shift in her demeanor that suggested the punitive portion of the proceedings was concluding. "In addition to the letter of reprimand,
You will also receive a commendation for exceptional performance under combat conditions. Your coordination of air support saved lives and prevented what could have been a significant tactical defeat. The apparent contradiction drew another objection from Captain Lawson. Colonel Sterling, a reprimand and a commendation for the same action seems contradictory and potentially confusing for future disciplinary standards. Captain Lawson, military service frequently involves contradictions. Sergeant Pierce violated procedures, but she also demonstrated precisely the kind of technical expertise and tactical leadership that makes the difference between mission success and mission failure. The reprimand acknowledges the procedural violation, while the commendation recognizes the exceptional results. Colonel Sterling gathered her documents before delivering what Samantha sensed would be the most important part of the decision. Sergeant Pierce, you will also be transferred to a new assignment where your demonstrated capabilities can be properly utilized. Your actions yesterday proved that you're capable of much more than passive observation and backup communications. The scope of the decision was beginning to register as something far more significant than simple disciplinary resolution. Colonel Sterling was not only addressing the immediate violation, but also recognizing that Samantha's skills had been systematically underutilized in her previous assignments. Furthermore, the communication failures and coordination gaps that necessitated your unauthorized intervention have highlighted serious deficiencies in our current operational procedures. You will be assigned to a task force that's developing new protocols for complex tactical situations where standard communication channels prove inadequate. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward with obvious satisfaction. Colonel Sterling, this assignment will allow Sergeant Pierce to contribute her expertise to preventing the kind of communication breakdowns that created yesterday's crisis situation.
As the inquiry concluded, Samantha stood at attention while processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. She had been both reprimanded and commended for the same actions, transferred to a position that would utilize her capabilities, and assigned to help prevent future communication failures that could endanger lives. Staff Sergeant Crawford approached her as the room emptied. "How do you feel about the outcome, Pierce?" Samantha considered the question carefully, recognizing that her situation had changed in ways she was still processing. "I feel like the military found a way to maintain discipline while acknowledging that sometimes the mission requires people to exceed their assigned roles when lives are at stake." "You realize this changes everything for your career trajectory, right? You're not going to be relegated to observation positions anymore. They're going to want to use your skills where they can make the maximum difference." The weight of that realization was both exciting and daunting. Samantha had proven herself capable of tactical coordination under the most demanding circumstances. But she had also learned that such capabilities came with significant responsibilities and risks that extended far beyond individual assignments. Captain Lawson passed her in the hallway, his expression neutral but professional. "Sergeant Pierce, I disagreed with the colonel's decision, but I respect the process. If you're going to be coordinating tactical operations in the future, make sure you're prepared for the responsibility that comes with that authority." Samantha nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir. I'll do my best to earn the trust that's been placed in my capabilities." As she walked back to her quarters to prepare for whatever came next, Samantha reflected on the journey that had brought her from overlooked observer to recognized tactical coordinator. Her voice had guided aircraft through deadly precision strikes, and now it would help guide the military toward better procedures for complex operational environments. 6 weeks after the inquiry, Samantha stood in a communications center that bore no resemblance to the basic equipment she had used at Hawkeye. Banks of sophisticated technology hummed quietly around her, and multiple screens displayed real-time tactical information from operations across the entire theater. She wore the insignia of a newly promoted staff sergeant, recognition of both her technical expertise and her proven ability to perform under the most demanding circumstances. The assignment to the Tactical Coordination Development Task Force had transformed her military career in ways she had never imagined possible. Instead of being relegated to observation duties, she was now helping to design the communication protocols and coordination procedures that would guide future operations. Her experience during Operation Valley Sweep had become a case study in adaptive leadership and emergency tactical coordination.
Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached her workstation with a satisfied expression and a folder of test results. Pierce, the new multi-frequency communication protocols you designed just completed their field testing. The results exceeded all expectations. Samantha looked up from the technical specifications she had been reviewing. How did the backup coordination procedures perform during simulated communication failures? Flawlessly. The field units reported that they maintained clear communication throughout the exercise, even when the primary networks experienced complete breakdowns. Your emergency frequency integration gives commanders the redundancy they need for complex operations where standard channels prove inadequate. The irony wasn't lost on Samantha. The unauthorized radio work that had nearly ended her career was now being institutionalized as standard procedure. The emergency frequency protocols she had improvised during the fog of battle were being incorporated into official tactical doctrine throughout the military. "There's something else you need to know," Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying unusual formality. "General Patricia Martinez wants to see you this afternoon. She's been following your work on the coordination protocols, and she has a proposition that could define the next phase of your career." Samantha felt the familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with apprehension. General Martinez commanded special operations for the entire region, and her attention could mean either extraordinary opportunity or unprecedented scrutiny. Did she indicate what this meeting concerns? "She's considering you for assignment to a new joint task force that's being formed. Advanced tactical coordination working directly with special operations teams and precision air assets. It's exactly the kind of role your demonstrated capabilities are suited for." As Rodriguez left to attend to other duties, Samantha returned to her work with renewed focus. The protocols she was developing would help ensure that future operations didn't experience the communication breakdowns that had nearly led to disaster during Valley Sweep. Her technical innovations were being incorporated into training programs and operational procedures across multiple branches of the military. Later that afternoon, she found herself in General Martinez's office, a space that radiated competence and authority through its efficient organization and strategic displays. The general was a compact woman with iron gray hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to assess everything with tactical precision. She gestured for Samantha to take a seat across from her desk. "Staff Sergeant Pierce, I've been reviewing your work on the tactical coordination protocols. Impressive technical innovation, especially considering your unconventional introduction to the field of battlefield coordination." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to operational improvements that could prevent the communication failures we experienced during Valley Sweep." General Martinez pulled out a classified folder marked with multiple security designations. "Your actions at Hawkeye have become something of a legend among special operations personnel. They tell stories about the voice that guided precision strikes through impossible conditions with nothing but terrain knowledge and tactical instinct." Samantha felt a flush of pride mixed with humility. "I was just responding to the tactical situation as my training had prepared me to do, ma'am." "That's exactly why I'm considering you for this new assignment. Special operations require personnel who can think independently and adapt to unexpected circumstances without waiting for permission. Your ability to coordinate complex tactical situations has been proven under the most demanding combat conditions." The general opened the classified folder, revealing organizational charts and mission descriptions that indicated operations of unprecedented importance and complexity. "This task force will be responsible for developing advanced tactical coordination between special operations teams and precision air assets. You'll be working with some of the most sophisticated tactical systems in the military, and your input will help shape how we conduct future high-stakes operations." The scope of the opportunity was breathtaking. Samantha had progressed from being sidelined as a backup observer to being asked to help design the future of special operations coordination. Her voice, once dismissed as unauthorized and inappropriate, was now being sought out by the highest levels of military leadership. "Ma'am, I'm honored by your confidence in my capabilities. I accept the assignment and the responsibilities that come with it."
Excellent. You'll be reporting to Colonel Michael Thompson at Joint Special Operations Command. Your first project will be developing coordination protocols for multi-domain operations that integrate ground, air, and electronic warfare elements.
It's challenging work that will test every aspect of your technical knowledge and tactical judgment. As Samantha left General Martinez's office, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet observer who had been relegated to Hawk's Eye was now being entrusted with responsibilities that would affect special operations across the entire military structure. That evening, she called Staff Sergeant Crawford to share the news of her assignment. "Lisa, everything you predicted about my career changing has come true. I'm being assigned to Special Operations Coordination at the highest levels." "I knew it would happen eventually, Sam. Your skills were too valuable to waste on backup observation duties. How do you feel about taking on this level of responsibility?" Samantha considered the question while looking out at the base where her military career had been transformed through a combination of technical competence, moral courage, and willingness to accept responsibility for difficult decisions. "I feel like I finally found where I belong in the military structure. All those years of being overlooked and underutilized led me to develop the capabilities that made this opportunity possible." 3 months later, news reached her that Phoenix units had completed another successful operation using the new coordination protocols she had developed. The tactical procedures that had emerged from her unauthorized actions at Hawk's Eye were now standard practice, credited with saving lives and improving mission effectiveness across multiple theaters of operation. Samantha had proven that leadership isn't defined by rank or official authorization. True leadership emerges from having the courage to act when action is needed, the skills to succeed under pressure, and the integrity to accept responsibility for the consequences of necessary decisions.
1 year after the events at Hawk's Eye, Staff Sergeant Samantha Pierce stood in the Advanced Operations Center at Joint Special Operations Command, surrounded by technology that represented the cutting edge of military tactical coordination. Multiple large screens displayed real-time intelligence from operations across 3 continents, while sophisticated communication systems provided instant connectivity to special operations teams, air assets, and command elements worldwide. She wore the subdued insignia of Renew assignment, but more importantly, she carried the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true calling within the military structure. The transformation from overlooked observer to essential coordinator had been completed through a combination of proven competence, moral courage, and institutional recognition that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from unexpected sources. The protocols she had developed were no longer experimental concepts being tested in controlled environments. They had become the standard operating procedures for special operations coordination, integrated into training curricula and operational doctrine across all branches of the military. Her innovations had prevented the kind of communication failures that had nearly led to disaster during Operation Valley Sweep. Colonel Michael Thompson approached her workstation with a mission folder and the purposeful stride of someone carrying important information. "Pierce, we've got a complex operation developing that's going to test every aspect of the coordination protocols you've designed. Multi-domain engagement with ground elements, precision air support, and electronic warfare integration." Samantha looked up from the technical analysis she had been conducting. "What's the operational environment, sir?" "Urban terrain with significant civilian population, multiple hostile elements, and communication challenges created by both geography and enemy electronic warfare capabilities. It's exactly the kind of scenario that requires the adaptive coordination procedures you've been developing." The complexity of the operation was precisely what she had been preparing for since her assignment to Joint Special Operations Command. The lessons learned from her experience at Hawk's Eye had been systematically incorporated into protocols designed to handle the most challenging tactical situations the military might encounter. "Sir, the new protocols are specifically designed for complex environments where standard communication channels may be compromised. The multi-frequency redundancy and alternative coordination procedures should provide the flexibility that ground commanders need." Colonel Michael Thompson opened the mission folder, revealing satellite imagery and intelligence assessments that painted a picture of operational complexity that would have been unmanageable using traditional coordination methods. "The ground element commander specifically requested you for tactical coordination.
Word has spread about your capabilities, and special operations teams want the person who can adapt to changing circumstances without waiting for permission. The request was both gratifying and sobering. Samantha had proven her ability to coordinate complex operations under pressure, but each new assignment brought increased responsibility and higher stakes. The soldiers who would depend on her coordination deserved nothing less than perfect execution of her duties. "I'll begin preparation immediately, sir. When is the operational timeline?" 48 hours. That gives you time to brief the coordination team and ensure all backup systems are ready for deployment. As Colonel Thompson left to attend to other operational requirements, Samantha reflected on how dramatically her role had evolved since that morning briefing at Forward Operation Base Ranger Point. She was no longer relegated to passive observation while others made crucial decisions. Instead, she had become the voice that special operations teams trusted to guide them through their most challenging missions. Her computer terminal chimed with an incoming message from an unexpected source. The communication was from Phoenix 1, the ground element leader whose unit she had helped save during Operation Valley Sweep. His message was brief but powerful. "Ghost 7, my team is using your new protocols on our current deployment. They're working perfectly. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the most important leadership comes from people who aren't afraid to exceed their authority when lives are at stake." The message reminded her that her legacy wasn't measured in technical innovations or procedural improvements, but in the lives that had been saved and the missions that had succeeded because someone was willing to act when action was needed. Her voice had guided aircraft through precision strikes, but more importantly, it had guided the military toward better ways of supporting the soldiers who carried out dangerous missions in defense of their country. That evening, she received notification that the communication protocols she had developed were being adopted by allied military forces, extending her influence beyond American operations to international special operations coordination. The procedures that had emerged from her unauthorized actions at Hawkeye were now being taught to military personnel from multiple nations.
As she prepared for the upcoming operation, Samantha thought about the young soldiers who would someday find themselves in positions similar to what she had experienced, overlooked, underutilized, but possessing capabilities that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her story had become part of military education, teaching future leaders that sometimes the most profound courage involves accepting responsibility for decisions that exceed your official authority. Standing in the operations center that had become her professional home, surrounded by the sophisticated equipment that would help her coordinate tomorrow's mission, Samantha remembered the quiet ridge where her career had been transformed. She had been told to observe and stay out of the way, but when the moment demanded action, she had found her voice and used it to save lives. Now, that voice was helping to shape the future of military operations, ensuring that other soldiers would have the communication tools and tactical support they needed to succeed in the most challenging environments. The observer had become the coordinator. The unauthorized voice had become the standard protocol, and the quiet professional had become a leader whose influence would be felt for years to come. Her radio crackled with routine traffic from operations around the world, but Samantha was no longer listening to routine communications. She was focused on the next mission, the next opportunity to prove that effective leadership comes not from those who hold the highest rank, but from those who hold the strongest resolve to do what's right when everything else has failed. The fog had lifted long ago, but the clarity she had found in that moment of decision at Hawkeye continued to guide her path forward. She had learned that the most important orders are sometimes the ones you give yourself, and the most valuable authority is the trust you earn through competence, courage, and unwavering commitment to the mission and the people who depend on you. Sometimes the most profound leadership comes not from those who hold rank, but from those who hold resolve. Samantha proved that courage isn't about having permission to act, it's about having the strength to do what's right when everything else has failed. Her quiet determination under pressure reminds us that heroes aren't always the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes they're the steady ones who speak up exactly when it matters most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen.
If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.